when I picked this movie, it was in the inspiration of I had seen so many negative reviews, but then I also would see some strangely positive reviews. And I can't remember a time where a new movie has come out where it seems like there's no one in the middle. There were people that hated it, and there were people that loved it. And I was a little surprised that a movie like this, a comedy movie, a spoof, would engender that kind of feeling. So as we get into the conversation, the movie is Unfrosted. It's Jerry Seinfeld's directorial debut. It is supposedly the history of how the Pop Tart came to be. Now, those of you who know Jerry Seinfeld remember that there was always a dozen cereal boxes in his apartment during the show.
Yes.
So Jerry was a big cereal guy. So the fact that this, tackling an issue between a feud between two rival cereal companies kind of makes sense, right?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
But this is essentially the very, very tongue-in-cheek history of how we got the Pop Tart.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the plot of the movie. I mean, there's really not much more you need to get into.
By the way, I didn't realize that town, Battle Creek, Michigan, that is the town, the home of both Kellogg's and Post. Is that true?
Absolutely.
I had no idea until that's pretty cool that a town could create two cereal brands.
Well, both Kellogg and Post, they were this was very, late 1800s. There was a lot of what would you call them, Kent? Like health farms or fat farms or things like that. Where they were trying to come up with health food
movement. Yeah. And Kellogg in particular was big in that. And that's where the cereal and everything grew out of that. Yeah. There's a couple movies about that are pretty hilarious. If I can't remember the title, but I will consult with the magic Google machine while we're talking and remember what they are.
If you ever want a good laugh, by the way, look into the history of cornflakes. Insane.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, most of the cereals, or at least how cereals began, was all trying to come up with health food for, there were some weird things.
Yeah.
Let's just say there were some weird things. If you want, check it out, the history. But to me, yes, this movie was one long running gag.
Mm-hmm.
And they're definitely. Why did it make you gag, Nick? And is it just because you can't stand Seinfeld?
No, it isn't. Because there are many comedians and actors in this movie that I genuinely love. And I think this movie is a prime example of good actors in a bad writing situation. I think that they tried too hard to be too tongue-in-cheek, because I think they could have, if the history of the Pop-Tart wasn't that compelling to where they had to make the whole thing a parody, then it shouldn't have been a thing to begin with. It all felt very much like he was trying to ride on the coattails of the Pop-Tart Bowl. I'm sure this was in production or thought of before.
Oh,
that. But
okay.
it nothing worked in this movie. The funniest joke was the Mad Men reference. And that
the Mad Men scene was hilarious. Like, it was genuinely a funny scene.
But that wasn't even an original thing. That's my problem with it. The Mad Men scene was hilarious, but it wasn't. It was an already established IP. And then they tried to do a January 6th joke, but it just didn't land. I don't know. It wasn't great. I didn't like it.
Kent?
Okay. The movie that I was referring to is called The Road to Wellness. And it came out.
Is that a documentary, or is that
1994? It's a fictional movie, and it's pretty funny. And it stars like Anthony Hopkins, and it's about Kellogg, the original one, in the sanitarium there in Battle Creek, where he came up with all these crazy health food ideas, and the cereals eventually grew out of that. So there's that movie. But as for this one, John said nobody's in the middle on this movie. I'm in the middle on this movie.
Oh, really?
Ah.
Okay. All right.
I think part of the reason that Nick may have not liked it at all is so many of the references and so much of the humor is drawn out of the early 1960s, and the whole, if you weren't around then, you don't get, some of the jokes don't make any sense, frankly, and that's one. And the other thing is, this is an old fashioned, in a sense, comedy that's just a scattershot bunch of, okay, we've got this flimsy plot line and we're going to throw as many gags out there as we can in the hour and a half. And they aren't all supposed to land, right? I mean, they might or they might not. They might land with me and not you, right? Mm-hmm. That is not the way movies are made anymore. So this movie itself even felt like a movie that would have been more out of the 70s, early 80s, before everything became so, I don't know exactly what, almost derivative and formulaic of something else, right? They're just throwing jokes out. I thought some of the performances were pretty, Melissa McCarthy was pretty entertaining, and I thought that I actually thought that it was kind of a clever take on the January 6th, that they didn't hammer it away, but it was clever enough. Like, but the guy with the Hugh Grant with the horns and stuff was kind of obvious.
Yes.
But I don't know if you saw in the background, there was one guy with the feet up on the desk, like the guy at Pelosi's
I did see that.
And stuff, and all of that. And I thought, but yet they didn't hammer it home real hard. It's just, we throw it out there and go. And so I found it amusing in places, kind of tedious in other places. And, and it has almost nothing to do, I'm sure, with how the Pop Tart really came into being. And my understanding is this is actually rooted in a joke or a routine that Seinfeld did years ago.
Oh, like in his stand-up?
Uh-huh.
Interesting.
That makes a little bit of sense. But yeah, there are some factual things in it, but it goes in a completely ludicrous way. Let me throw a movie at you, Kent. Does this kind of fall into the same vein of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World?
Those kind of movies, absolutely. It's also the same vein of, not in the exact same way, but if you think about the way they use the jokes, like the Naked Gun movies, the airplane movies.
Yeah, one of my friends just asked, like, when you made the reference that you just did, Kent, were you kind of comparing it to Airplane? And that's what, for the record, I was with Nick. I did not find this movie very funny. I thought that it reminded me of, like, what was the movie that we did a few years ago that it just did not tickle my funny bone? And it was like The Life of Brian, one of those movies that we did where I can tell they're just trying to do joke, and just very few of them landed. And sometimes those movies, some Airplane, I think, is hysterical.
Airplane's
but some of those
amazing.
movies just do not tickle my funny bone. And look, as we talked about, I did go into this movie thinking that I would not be a fan of it. I did like the Mad Men scene quite a bit. I rewound it once I realized exactly what was going on, so I could rewatch it from the start. But I just, the rest of it didn't land very well. But I'll also admit, I mean, if Kent's saying and John's saying there is stuff that you literally have to be around in the 60s or know a lot about the 60s, I mean, I feel like I'm a pretty solid history buff, maybe not all the way in 60s comedy, I guess.
Right. But I offered that opinion last week. I thought, because I actually watched it last week, the day I picked it. I watched it last Friday night.
Yeah.
And that was my observation was I'm going to understand why, especially Nick, but maybe even you too.
What about your wife, though?
I don't know.
Because she hated it.
No, she did not like it. And I don't know if it's really her kind of humor,
because she likes better humor. Good take.
I wouldn't call it
no
that.
Wonder I didn't like it if it's based on
honestly,
Seinfeld.
I mean, this movie was, yes, a lot of the humor. You got to understand the time. I love Bill Burr as President Kennedy. I love the fact, he's going out with the Doublemint twins. It's just, kind of playing some of those old jokes. I like that. And remember, this is all happening before I was born, but I was kind of familiar with, just the vein of which
his line about like ever since I don't remember how he described her, but she sung that birthday song. I thought that was the way he delivered that line was.
And the idea of creating a cereal called Jackie O's,
made me laugh.
Bada boom. I can give you a whole ton of examples, but I was a little kid when all of this stuff came out, right? I don't remember the Pop Tart coming out particularly, but the Stingray bike was a revolution. Every kid my age wanted a Stingray bike when it came out because it had the cool banana seats and right? Well, that was an innovation in 1965 or whenever it came out. And I had those stupid sea monkeys when I was a little kid. Somebody gave them to me. I mean, all of those things. So that's going to hit with me. Yeah, it's not even going to, if you don't, it's not even going to come close to people who don't realize what happened in the 60s. And like the Doublemint twins joke, you have to know that they were the advertising for Doublemint gum.
Right.
Yes.
So I knew the Sea Monkeys thing. I understood a lot of these references and jokes that they made. I had understood it. They just kind of like what Josh said. They just didn't land. I didn't know the Doublemint twins thing, but I kind of off of context figured that out. But even that joke, it was just kind of, oh, get it? Kennedy was a womanizer. Ha, that's the joke. And just stuff like that. It was just or the whole, I can't even afford to send my kids to college. It's $200 a year. Like that. I get the jokes. They just didn't find them particularly good. They were just kind of like attempts. they were attempts. It's like me trying to tell jokes and these guys don't get them.
Now, a couple of the characters. So you mentioned Hugh Grant earlier. Hugh Grant plays the voice of Tony the Tiger. If you know the history of the voice of Tony the Tiger, the voice actor who voiced him, and they actually used his real name, Thurl Ravenscroft, is from Nebraska. He was born in Norfolk. But the fact that they made him, the fact that they made him, he's like this serious actor. I kind of liked that shtick throughout the movie where he's trying to convince everybody that he's this real serious actor, but the only thing he's ever going to be known for is doing the tiger voice. And then the ongoing shtick with the Walter Cronkite character being just this, this lonely degenerate.
How much of that was rooted in reality? Do you know, Kent?
None. As far as reading I don't think there was ever any reports or anything, but it was a good parody of Cronkite, who, once again, you guys would have no clue about really Cronkite's influence on the.
Whoa, Ken! I went to broadcasting school. Come on now. Yeah, see, I don't want this to just turn into young people don't know anything just because I didn't find the movie funny.
Don't know anything. I'm saying you can't understand the level at which he was at and the import that everything that came out of Walter Cronkite's mouth had. He was, almost, let's put it this way, almost single-handedly, Walter Cronkite turned the American public against the war in Vietnam.
Yeah, what was the line that Johnson said? Once we've lost Cronkite, we've lost the country, or something like that?
That was the level at which Walter Cronkite, and so he was taken as this great, almost oracle or whatever, and the foundation of broadcast news, right? And da-da-da-da-da. And so then here you see him, this guy playing with toys and being sort of a home life's bad degenerate kind of guy. That's making fun of a Walter Cronkite that's not, that you kind of have to know where he was held then to see why it's the joke that might work now. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I did get that joke, but again, it just wasn't funny to me. Like, I get what they were trying to do, but it wasn't landing. None of these jokes were landing. Well, the funniest joke for me was the Madman thing and then the milkman on the grassy knoll. That was kind of funny. That
Well,
got me.
but a lot of
That was like
that,
one of the last jokes of the whole movie.
but a lot of that is more common stuff. I think what Kent is saying, you to really understand the influence, it'd be like, to use an example, if someone made a movie about, the history of Nebraska football and made the Tom Osborne character out to be like this Walter Cronkite, the absurdity is in it is completely different.
The antithesis of what Osborne is.
Of what he was or what he was perceived to be. And that was the driving point of the joke.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you this then. We often will say, "Oh man, the joke is made funnier by you having to explain it." Like this conversation has been a lot of, "No, you don't understand it. Let me explain it to you." Does that make it good or funny then? Like, I think that kind of.
But that's the point, and that's why I thought that there was going to be a generational divide on this movie, because a lot of the humor is set in a completely different time, and it'd be like if someone made this hilarious movie about. Shoot, I can't think of an example.
You're trying to think of something you don't have any
that I have
reference to.
Yeah, no. Well, okay. Here's an example, Nick. That the Chargers video.
Oh, The Sims?
The Sims. Got no clue about any of that stuff. That's why when I watch that video, I'm like, I don't get it.
You didn't get it.
I don't get it because that's not my world. I don't understand it, and I've never understood it. But so to me, that kind of stuff would not land at all.
And I do think part of this is also that Jerry Seinfeld is never going to be mistaken for pick a great director, or even the
or even a good actor,
Spielberg.
Yeah,
Spielberg, right? He is not. This is not a well-directed film, right? It goes in too many directions all at once. It has subplots that aren't needed to be, that don't get you anywhere, that just seem to take up some time, like going to Russia. What was that all about? Those kind of things.
And the ravioli thing, that ravioli bit was very, in a movie full of bits that didn't land with me, that was the one that landed the least.
That one didn't land with me either. But on the other hand, Chef Boyardee, I hate to say, was a major part of my upbringing, because you could get that stuff right out the box.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, you could. Yes, that is so true. Yeah, I don't want to make it sound like I think this is the best movie I've ever seen. It's not.
No, that was The Hill.
But I did enjoy it for what it was, because to me, kind of use a wrestling term, this was a movie of a bunch of run-ins, right? Yep. So, you get one of those matches where it's two guys going at it, and then all of a sudden you bring in the nostalgia act. Here comes Hulk Hogan. Here comes the NWO. Here comes Ric Flair. Here comes Sting. And it was just a bunch of run-ins. And so part of the humor was, like, for example, when the milk mafia, and it's Peter Dinklage, Tyrion from Game of Thrones. Mm-hmm. When he walks in, I busted out laughing just because, oh God, it's Peter Dinklage. So to me, a lot of the humor was almost in just, oh, who's going to be the next, run-in? Who's going to come in and do a sight gag or make a joke?
And that's where your madman joke comes in.
Right.
Yeah, and I love that part.
No, the madman joke was really, really, that was the funniest joke in the whole movie. But then like I said, it's not their
when they're crapping all over the town, because it seemed like something that Roger and Don would do, just totally rip it down to shreds for having nothing to do. Oh, that was good.
What was the because Don Draper wanted to name it, what was it? He wanted to make Pop Tarts this like almost sexual thing where they're
yeah.
And
I'm trying to remember.
And even the goofy, here's how the name came up, that Cronkite read it off the silly putty backwards. I remember using the silly putty to copy the Sunday comics when I was a little kid, right?
I would do that with silly putty too, though. I felt like that was kind of a universal thing.
Well, but in that era, that was a new deal, right? I remember when silly putty came out in the store, right? And every kid got one. So you have Walter Cronkite, the serious messing around with the stuff that I was using when I was 4 years old, right? that's part of a humor that would hit with me that isn't going to hit with somebody that doesn't come at. So it's kind of how you come at the movie too. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That does. No, I understand why, some of the humor doesn't hit. I get it. And that's why I really enjoyed picking this, because it was funny to read some of the people who hated it, and then some of the people who I follow on social media who loved it. And then to hear from my wife who said she couldn't get through 30 minutes of it. It was like, oh, this is going to be an interesting conversation. And sure enough, it kind of broke exactly the way I thought it would,
So just FYI, I thought, well, if I was actually going to write a review of this thing and give it a grade, we do the A through F rather than
would you give it a C?
I'd give it a C plus, probably C or C plus.
Yeah, that's kind of where
I gave it 1.5 out of 5 stars.
So that's good. That would be a D plus in my rating.
Yeah.
So
I bumped it up. I said on Letterboxd, I bumped it up a half star for the Mad Men scene. So it would have been 1 out of 5, hilarious. But I liked the Mad Men scene.
Yeah. Well, there you go. See, wasn't that a fun conversation?
Not really. It was just you and Kent saying we're young the whole time. And then you got Steve all mad.
You don't have to be defensive.
You're the one who was being defensive. No, you don't get it. You don't get it.
We got the jokes. They just weren't funny to us.
Yeah.
We understood the jokes.
Yeah, and then Steve comes in there like all younger generations. Nick and Josh think that anything that happened before they were born either doesn't count, doesn't make sense, or maybe didn't even actually happen. Even though my favorite part was Mad Men, which is just so that was set in.
Hold on.
1960s.
But you watched that whole series. You were laughing at the Mad Men thing.
I laugh at jokes in Mad Men, though.
Well, but
I just don't like the implication that I didn't find it funny because I don't understand 1964.
No, I'm saying I understand why you didn't like it. It's not an insult. Again, it's like me and The Sims. I don't get it, so I'm not probably gonna. A lot of this stuff's not gonna land. Doesn't mean it's terrible, but that's all. Don't have to be defensive.
You're the one who's defensive. You're defensive, John. You're defensive. Poll question: who's more defensive, John or me?
Defensive John.
By the way, we did get a text from David that said, "Damn it, I agree with Nick." So
sorry, David.
There you go. Yep, indeed.
Well, we can't be perfect. Well, next week it's Memorial Day week.
Yes,
and Kent's got some family things to deal with, so we're actually going to wait an extra week.
2 weeks from now.
Yep.
So Nick is next to pick.
Nick, are you picking the Sims movie?
No.
Okay.
We are going to take a break from Netflix, though. We've been on a bit of a Netflix binge.
We have been doing a lot of Netflix movies. Where are we going?
Max. We're going to watch Swiss Army Man.
Swiss Army Man.
It's got Daniel Radcliffe. Came out in 2016.
All right. I don't even know this movie. John, any takes?
Kent?
None. I know of it, but I never saw it. So
all right.
It did not play theatrically around here, at least. I assume it was released in theaters somewhere since it's that old, but I don't recall it ever even playing on a screen in Lincoln. So
Swiss Army Men.
Man.
Oh, man.
Swiss Army Man.
It's an hour and 38 minutes, so it's already good in our book.
That's a beautiful thing.
Well, we'll have 2 weeks to absorb it.
Yes, we will indeed.